really good quality outdoor play. So I'm Anna. I usually do a bit of an introduction, but actually I've done it in every session. So I'm going to skip that. That's a bit about me on the screen if you've managed to read it. If not, we've got a whole blog post. So we'll just crack on because we do have a bit of ground to cover today, and I want to make sure that we're getting in some discussion time. So it goes without saying that outdoor play is absolutely essential for children. And when asking why, I think the first instinct is for us to think about the benefits of it, which I will touch on in a moment. But actually, for me, thinking a little bit deeper about it, initially, what comes to mind is the fact that children love it. Children love outdoor play, and it was hypothesized in the 80s that humans, but particularly children, have a natural tendency and propensity to affiliate with life, with nature, and that we are biophilic. So in Greek, that it literally means a love of life, of living things. So if we love living things, if we love the outdoors, if we love nature, then why not be in it? And we know from more recent research as well that the more we encourage outdoor play, the more we'll promote children's lifelong love of nature. And that means that they will fight a bit harder to protect the environment. And if you've seen children interacting with plants, with insects, with animals, they're always so very caring and gentle, usually, not always. So we do have that natural tendency to associate with nature. So if we have it, we need to capitalize on it and make sure that we're out there. So for me, that's one of the reasons why it's essential to be out there in order to save our species, to protect the environment and ensure that we are going to survive in the wild, and that we're not completely becoming urbanized and everything is tarmac, which is increasingly the case in the UK anyway. Obviously, we have the benefits of outdoor play that are more or less to do with development. The most commonly paraphrased one is vitamin D. So fresh air, vitamin D, bone development, obviously, particularly in winter. So we do need to get children outdoors and make sure that they are getting their daily dose of vitamin D. But we also know that if children are outdoors playing, whether they're in nature or just outside in the playground, they move more, they're more active, so less chances of risk of obesity. They play longer, and this is particularly interesting for teachers because that means they have longer attention spans and longer periods of concentration. So we do know, and we have noticed, that it's particularly beneficial for those children with ADHD who struggle to sit or complete tasks. So that's a huge benefit in terms of learning. We also know that it helps with our blood pressure, our circulation, our breathing, and also with our ability to cope with risk and challenge and develop our resilience and self-regulation, confidence, independence, all those skills that can't quite be taught in the classroom, that the outdoor environment can support. So this is a nice infographic that comes from Outdoor Play Canada, actually. This is based on their position statement on play. So links in all of the different slides. I've kind of dotted little nuggets everywhere around the slides, but also in the useful reading section, useful documents and further reading that will be shared with you after the session. So lots of different resources that you can go and follow. We know that there is a requirement for children to spend some time outdoors and engage in outdoor play as part of the preschool cycle program. So I'm very interested in figuring out a few details around your own practice of outdoor play. So how long do children spend outdoors in your setting? What kinds of opportunities can children experience in your outdoor space? And also how you feel about it, which is particularly of interest to me. How do you feel about your environment? Would you change or would you? Excellent. Heather, are you still there?
Yes. Hi.
Hi, you're going to say something.
Oh gosh, don't even worry. I was just gonna say our adventure playground is off to the side. It's not in the back of our yard, and we have a shed with mud kitchens and wooden spools and old tires and logs and things, and that's our area.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Mud kitchens are really popular, even with the older ones, interestingly. Okay, so we had some interesting conversations. There are very different approaches to particularly how much time children spend outdoors. So people do blocks, either one block or multiple blocks. What's come out of the other groups? So I was with group 2.
One thing, Anna, that maybe I'll mention, which is new with our new program for our preschoolers anyway. With our elementary schools too, we have an extra recess for them to go outside in the afternoon. But with the preschool program, there is 2 1-hour free plays per day now, 2. So that adds a lot to the kids going outside more and doing free play activities outside. So that was a really cool thing that came with the new program.
I think there's still some discrepancy in how that's applied. I think some people still do kind of one long block, and some people split it into two sections, possibly. That was really interesting. In terms of opportunities, again, lots of difference. Group 1, do you want to share some of the stuff that cropped up? What kind of opportunities can children experience in your spaces?
Well, I'll speak if that's okay. Interesting. So Heather and I are neighbors. She's at a school just down the street from us, and I've heard a lot about her outdoor adventure area. In comparison, we have nothing. We have the schoolyard, and we have a play structure that's off limits at the moment because of winter. So basically the kids just have themselves. We don't have the same kind of resources. And in the conversation that we had, someone mentioned you don't need a lot of resources, but you do need some kind of creativity when you don't have material to, especially when they're 5. They will gravitate to the puddles, which isn't a bad thing. However, we don't have the change of clothes. It just becomes more problematic. We've been advocating and asking for shed and materials to put in, just things that they can go to use to be creative and be imaginative and create all that wonderful stuff for free play outside. So without it, we find it challenging to provide that.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think there's scope for you getting those resources? So if you do request them,
we request them, but it's always budget. There's always something else. So we hope. So it just makes it challenging. I was saying that we follow the same recess schedule as everyone in the school. We're 7 kindergarten groups at our school, so we have a big cohort. And so we have the 20-minute recesses, makes it difficult, and we have our spares and so on. So it makes it difficult to fit in an extra, like that second hour. So what I've been doing as kind of a compromise in my head is adding a 30-minute to a recess, 15, 20 minutes, depending on what's happening, but adding extra time to a recess so that we are outside longer. And the kids love being outside. Today, there was a section that had sand because the snow had melted. Oh my goodness. Like played in the sand, got super dirty, but so they love being outside.
Yeah. Tapping into donations is probably the way to go until you get the resources. If you get the resources, you never know, with budgets, all you can do is request. But making a list of stuff that parents can donate, local businesses can donate, little kind of tires, dressing up, those kinds of things, pots and pans. There's stuff that anybody can give, and people do regularly give to charity kind of shops. I don't know if there are charity shops over there. We have loads. People are quite generous, especially when you tell them what you're going to use them for.
That's
blankets.
a good idea.
The only issue at that point is storage. You still need some kind of shed, but you can deal with that a little bit easier by getting some temporary boxes rather than not having anything at all. So I think usually I do a visual infographic and just send it out to parents. This is what we're looking for. Usually 3 things at a time, so they don't get too overwhelmed and forget. But every couple of weeks,
idea.
Ask for some more stuff. Yeah, definitely. We've got something in the chat. How are stores love to donate to schools? Yeah.
Another great place too is any eco center, because they get lots of materials that people just don't want anymore, and sometimes there's super cool gems that get given, particularly tires and stuff. That's a really fun boards, piping, gutters, stuff like that, and you can just take it.
That's a great
target your parents who are professionals. So if you have any plumbers, you can get offcuts of pipes. If you have any roofers, you can get offcuts of guttering, and tires usually cost money to get rid of, so people are quite happy to donate them. There's a lot of stuff that you can get for free. It's just actually at that point it's like, where do we put it all? But that's a nice problem to have, really. I think. Excellent. Anybody else? What kinds of opportunities do you have in the space, and do you feel like the space could be improved or changed, or would you like something removed for various reasons?
Louis.
Hi there. This is Joanne. I guess the one thing I think I guess we were asking about improving, I think would be really nice. Like, we made gardens 2 years ago or 3 years ago now. They're just small little gardens. But during recess, they often get, they're hardy plants that we put in there, but they get stamped on and stomped on and stuff. And it would be really nice, I think, more gardening space, or maybe like an enclosure for the gardening area. So, because that's a great also place to play, for children to play, I think without structure, to let them explore how to plant something and watch it grow without necessarily being told and seeing what what comes up that they haven't planted, and because that's a form of play also, I think. But anyways, in Knowlton, Quebec, they have this amazing garden, organized garden, and they've just basically tapped into a lot of people to get resources for that. So anyways, that's it. That's what I would say.
It's a great opportunity to link into the curriculum as well. Yeah, unstructured play as well as linking to the curriculum, linking to science, linking to vocabulary, everything. So yeah, gardening, and children love to take care of things. Plants particularly love to plant things, sometimes dig them up too soon to see how much they've grown, but that's part and parcel of learning. So yeah, absolutely, it's always a nice opportunity to have. And I think for those because we've got a split. We've obviously got schools that benefit from natural areas and greenery, and schools that only have a tarmac yard. And there are ways of greening your playground in tarmac, actually. Planters are usually the easiest things to achieve, and they're great for actually planting things, but also having them as enclosures for different textures, so gravel, bark, chip, that kind of thing, and have your small world playing into that as well. So planters are extremely versatile. On casters, so on wheels would be great, so they can be moved around as you need, but you can still have a lot of kind of nature play in a completely kind of tarmacked playground. So don't be discouraged if you're hearing about the people who have lots of green space and woodland walks. You can achieve really good outdoor nature play in tarmacked areas as well. If people want to share any more, then obviously pop things in the chat. You've got that. It's always nice to actually talk to you, but if you prefer to pop things in the chat, then you can. Yeah, pallets are great. You can get plastic ones as well. They're a little bit more expensive. Wood ones usually come for free sometimes. So yeah, they are really good resources. Excellent. Thank you very much, everybody. It's really nice to hear about, the different types of provision, and actually to see that things are very similar to what happens here in the UK. So it's nice to stay relevant, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to see what everybody's experience was. It's safe to say that outdoor play and the quality of it is directly dictated by the environment. We can't get away from that. Everything we do is either promoted, encouraged, or constrained by the environment. And quality in outdoor learning, play and learning environments is a bit of a black hole. You can get really lost in this. There are lots of different opinions, there are lots of perspectives, there are lots of different frameworks that you can apply that measure the quality, judging through different parameters and different characteristics. So it really is, we could spend hours and hours looking at that kind of stuff. But I've simplified it a little bit, picked out some key concepts, and also I'm going to share some resources with you that I think are really, really useful. So first of all, what children tell us that they like in the outdoor play and learning environment that they frequent, and what makes them good quality. First of all, access to nature and greenery. They do like spaces where they can play in nature, whether that's digging, interacting with natural loose parts, so things like logs and pine cones, trees, grass, anything like that. Again, digging is quite a very popular opportunity. So access to nature, but also freedom. So freedom to explore, challenge always comes up, challenge and risk, movement, different types of movement, and generally supportive adults. So, there's lots of, we had quite a gap in research looking at children's experiences and opinions, but since the year 2000, had a few really good studies that looked at that. So that's what usually comes through from children, and there is consensus about that. So that's children's opinions. As adults, we tend to think about it more in more detail. We tend to complicate things as well. And so one of the main things that you will hear when we're talking about what makes a good quality play environment is affordance, or affordances, plural. Has anybody heard of this? Anybody familiar with the term affordance? Yes, no, in the chat would be really good for me to figure out whether or not there is some awareness of this. Who knows? Okay, thank you for that. So affordance is a really interesting concept. It started off simple. We've, like everything, overcomplicated it, but I think there is room for overcomplicating this, to be fair. So affordance came about in the 60s. It was very much linked to the physical properties of an object or an environment. What is it about the object that makes it interesting? How can we interact with it based on its physical properties? It's grown a little bit to include emotional properties, to include a more dynamic kind of relationship, and I'll explain that in a moment. But the best way to illustrate affordance is to actually look at a table or a desk or a chair. And I'll ask you, and feel free to unmute yourselves for this, because it's useful to have this conversation. So, looking at this table on the screen, what is it? What is it about its physical properties, its characteristics, and also the environment around it, and how it's all laid out, that tells us, our adult brains, that this is a table?
Do we speak?
Yes, yes, please.
Chairs, that tells us it's a table. Chairs, flat surface on the top. There's something, a vase resting on it. There's the legs of it. The thing that's, there's legs resting on the, I guess, the tabletop. There's the bar across that that it's raised. Yeah, that's what I saw. Okay.
Yeah, excellent. So the height of it as well is perfect for sitting at it and doing whatever we need to do. And also, we've been educated into knowing that this is a table. We've received the visual label that goes with this is a table setting in our childhood. So if a 2-year-old walked into the room, how do you think they would interact with that table? What might be the first thing they do, and why?
I think they would probably crawl under it, because that looks probably the most fun and way that they could engage with it, because they're not able to access the upper level, but they are able to access kind of like the hiding spaces and things like underneath the table.
Yeah, definitely. 9 times out of 10, they will just go under, and depending on their ability, they might climb a chair, they might not, but it really depends. But yeah, definitely they'd go under, because that's what they can see. If a 9-year-old was interacting with a table and there were no adults around, what do you think they might do with it?
They would be more likely to sit at one of the chairs, and I think.
Yeah, and use it as a table.
And use it as a,
yeah. Any other ways that they might interact with it? Put stuff on the table, go underneath it, sit. Yeah.
Sorry, it's Joanne again. They might stand on the chair and walk across the table, depending. They may lie down on a table. We have smaller tables in our classroom, and during relaxation, they're close to the floor, and I allow the table. The students ask, can they lie on top of the table? And I say, absolutely. So they lie on top, underneath. It's like a bunk bed,
Yeah, lovely. That's really nice. Have a snooze on the table. But yeah, they might exert the power more. They might use it as a den, or some of the 8-9-year-olds I worked with would just go flip it, and just cause chaos. And that's because they can. So affordance is very much a dynamic relationship. So it's dictated by the physical properties of an object or an environment, in our case, talking about the outdoor play environment. But it's very much in flow, in relationship with the person who's using it, and what their age is, their ability, what they've been educated to do, to think, what they've been constrained or encouraged to do or not to do. So culture comes into it a lot. And this is what makes affordance really interesting. It's defined very briefly as what an object or an environment offers an individual. So all the different opportunities that you can engage with that particular object or an environment. But obviously they are dictated by whoever's interacting with it. And that's what makes it so interesting. So when it comes to play, the goal is to have multiple affordances in the environment, as many as possible. And how do we multiply those affordances? Well, first of all, through open-ended resources. And that's why loose parts are so great. And it was really nice to hear that a lot of people do have loose parts in the space. And if they don't, run around it. I've just seen that comment, Catherine. Yes, they might probably run around the table. But even if we've got things like Small World, for example, so toy cars are usually a good example of reduced, limited affordances. A toy car can only be a toy car, but actually it's a stick, a crate, a log, a tire, a cable reel, can be many, many things to different children. And also that's why it's quite nice that some of you, even though you might not like it, some of your children are interacting with other children, with older children. Because if they see other children using resources in different ways, then they might apply that, they'll learn from that and multiply those affordances. So actually that's one of the reasons we should encourage intergenerational play. So that's one thing. We can multiply it through open-ended resources. We can also multiply it through variety. So variety is the spice of life. So different textures, aiming for different textures, different types of movement, which are really, really important at age 4 and 5 when children are just starting to master their own bodies. And a lot of the time, we think about running and climbing and the more kind of wheeling, the ways of movement that we associate with early years. But this is a really nice list of a whole different range of types of movement that children like to engage in and should be able to engage in for their physical as well as cognitive development, because body movement isn't just about physical development. It's also about the vestibular system, which is directly linked to balance, reading, writing, and proprioception as well. And this is something we've touched on in the child development session. So this is a nice little list of, okay, maybe we can try different types of movement. Sliding, tumbling, crash mats are fantastic for your, gymnasts, becoming gymnasts. Scooping, hopping, jumping, kicking, creeping, so places to hide, all of that gets us thinking about what opportunities are there in the environment for movement. This comes from this screenshot is from the Preschool Outdoor Play and Learning Environments Best Practice Toolkit. It's a natural learning initiative. It's a North Carolina state initiative. It's a really useful document, actually. It's full of ideas. It's also full of pictures, which is quite nice, and it's saved in the useful, or is it further reading folder that we'll share out after the session. But it is a great way to think about what else could be in the environment. And they also have best practice indicators. So going back to the idea of quality frameworks, they have one. So 10 indicators of quality play and learning environments. And their focus in this toolkit particularly is on naturalizing environments, so how to incorporate more nature into it, which is also very useful. But variety, so having as much of this as possible in the environment, playing with identity, dressing up. Doesn't always have to be fancy dress and superheroes costumes. It can just be all blazers and hats, interesting stuff, adult-sized, small things, big things, so scale, and planting, playing with the elements. So what do we do on snowy days? But also what do we do on windy days? Can we have a windy day box? Ribbons attached to sticks, kites, let's make a kite. If children have never made a kite, let's make one and fly one. Different variations in topography, so elevation is really important. Flat is usually boring to children. It's great for wheels and sports, but actually not much else. So can we have a mound, or can we have things that can stack up that we can climb and jump off? Different materials, so loose parts, but also fixed stuff that enables children to tie things to, hide behind, art and imagery, playing with sounds. So all of this multiplies affordances, lots of different opportunities. But we could have all of this in the space without the right permissions, without allowing children to engage in creative ways with all of these items and multiply and combine things, thinking about combining sand and water. We can do that outdoors. It multiplies the affordances and what we can build with the sand. So permission is everything, allowing children to engage in challenging play, allowing children to play with the elements, those kinds of things. Just double checking the chat. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, that's the link to the toolkit. It's everywhere. We've got links in the slides, we've got links, so it is a really good resource. This is link, and again, I have provided the URL for this in the handout. Another framework, 10 things to think about when you're looking at your outdoor space. They do emphasize size. I would argue they can have a really good quality space without it being too big. It's more about what we put in it and how much freedom children have. I've worked with schools that had tiny yards and actually managed to provide a huge variety of stuff for children. And it's just thinking outside the box a little bit, but it's definitely achievable. Again, in terms of quality frameworks, I don't tend to get too technical about stuff, especially when we don't have that much time, but this is definitely worth mentioning. I don't know if anybody heard of the 7 C's info guide. It is essentially a quality framework.
We have 6 C's. I don't know. I'm trying to figure out which the 7th one is. I think it's I'm sorry. It says, I'm looking at them going, so I think maybe we have 6 C's with our school board.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this is a fantastic guide, and it was born in Canada. It's based on a 5-year study carried out with early childhood centres in Vancouver, and their research includes these 7 characteristics. So it's less about resources and more about thinking about the layouts and how things and how different areas connect, and thinking about the journeys that children move through to get to their social spaces. It's a really, really good resource. It's a very easy read as well. And again, there are pictures and suggestions. So I would recommend having a look at this and thinking about what you can incorporate in the space from it. It does primarily address for 3 to 5 year olds, so it's the right kind of age. And these are some of the things that they found in terms of what makes a good play and learning environment. And no surprise, there is overlap. There's always overlap because there are some things that we just know for a fact that make up a good quality space. But control, so children being able to control the environment, really, really useful. And that's how you achieve it through loose parts most of the time. Containing living things, spaces that are sensitive to climate, so changes in the seasons, also really, really good, and incorporating that into the curriculum. Scale, so again, thinking of affordances and can children actualize those affordances at their particular height and their ability, imagination, and social spaces, so that allow children to play in groups or solitary spaces. Very important, equally important. Very good document, and I used to share this with my students at university, and would always apply it and think about how what the quality of the spaces are in terms of all those different characteristics. It is really, really good. And also you have these the characteristics mapped against 4 and 5 year olds' abilities, physical abilities particularly. So what are 4 and 5 year olds expected to be able to do, and how can we promote that through the environment outdoors, whether that's through resources or through thinking about how children move around the space, which is really important, having pathways and ensuring that there is freedom of movement around the space. So yeah, it's a very good one, the 7 C's. Well, we won't go through all of the C's. There is one in particular that I'd like to pick on, and that's challenge. So challenge as in taking risks and risky play. And that is because we recognize that it is absolutely crucial to children's development and learning. Children can't learn to their full potential without encountering challenge and trying to overcome it. And then by overcoming it, moving on to the next challenge and constantly expanding their limits and their capabilities. So I'd like to pose a question to the room. When I say risk, and deliberately no pictures in here, what do you think of? What words, thoughts, feelings come to you first? Is risk.
Probably danger.
Yeah.
I would say, the sort of scary, from an adult. Are we talking about from an adult's point? Like for me, it's always assessing. Like I think about always like thinking of what they're going to get involved in, and I try and jump a few steps ahead of them to say, okay, assessing where this might go. But for a child, I think there's always a fear. There's like a fear, but then there's also an elation.
Yeah, definitely. Making the adult's heart jump. I have said generally, yeah, panic. Possibility of getting hurt. Yeah, Catherine. Possibility for growth as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, from children's perspective, it's that dichotomy of it's fun and it's scary, and it's fun because it's scary. And actually, if we manage it, then it's less scary. It's more exciting. So it's that feeling of thrill and exhilaration that children associate with risky play. And for us, it's just pure, oh my God, they're going to get hurt and I might get blamed. And what do I do then? And that is generally what you get in the Western world, particularly. If I was to ask this question in a different part of the world, it would be very, very different. But yes, there does seem to be a negative connotation around risk. And when you look at the definition in the dictionary around it, then you can start to understand. But the play sector, play practitioners and experts and researchers have worked really hard on reframing risk, because we've noted that the negative connotations associated with risk in turn negatively impact on children's ability to engage in challenging play. So the Canadian Public Health Association defines risk very differently and in a much more complex way. So challenges and uncertainties within the environment that an individual can recognize and learn to manage by choosing, so wanting to encounter them while determining their own limits. So quite a lot in that, it's quite a complex way of defining it. But what that tells us is that risk is associated more with uncertainty, not danger. So risk means a possibility of injury, but it doesn't always mean likelihood. It also means learning, recognizing and learning to manage those risks and determining your own limits and pushing them, arguably, for most children. So risk should not be associated with the likelihood of danger. Hazard, on the other hand, is very much a danger. So hazards are the kinds of things that can really hurt children, that children don't usually have the capacity to recognize, and that as adults we should remove from the space. A blade, a sharp blade, glass in the playground, those kinds of things are not risky play opportunities, they're downright hazards, and that is our job to remove them. Risk, on the other hand, is more about possibility and overcoming or going past what is already known, and it's actually that opportunity for growth, like Catherine said. That was really a really nice way of putting it. So in play, risk doesn't mean caught in danger. It means the types of play that children find thrilling and exciting. And yes, there is a possibility of physical injury, but it's about guiding children to recognize and evaluate those possibilities and responding to them, getting them to think about how to anticipate danger and how to manage it. Climbing high, jumping, getting dirty, balancing, tumbling, play fighting, rough and tumble, all of that usually falls in the category of risky play that makes us panic a little bit. But we know that's necessary for children to develop and become healthy, adapted human beings. We wouldn't have got so far as a species without taking risks. So risk taking is part of life. By removing risks, we are harming children. We know that, and that's what the research tells us as well. We do them no favors by trying to keep them as safe as possible. As safe as reasonably practicable is one. As safe as possible is detrimental to their development. And this extract comes from that position statement that I mentioned on active outdoor play from Outdoor Play Canada. Developed in 2015, 14 organizations got together, lots of research was reviewed, and it's a pretty good document and encourages educators, teachers particularly, to promote and encourage more risky play in schools. And that's because of the benefits. We wouldn't do it just to see what children do. We do it because we know that children are more active when taking risks, so less likely to become obese. All the different types of motor skills develop. Resilience, risky play is one of the only things that develops resilience. Risky play and conflict resolution. So resilience and the capacity to manage your own risk and coping with those strong emotions that children struggle with because of the level of development in their brain, but actually that can really help them. Children feeling capable, self-efficacy, thinking of themselves as capable. You've seen children taking a risk and overcoming it and thinking, yes, I've done it. And just the smiles on their faces, and then trying something different again. And that correlates with taking risks in the classroom as well. If they think of themselves as capable to overcome risks, that will translate into them taking more risks in the classroom. And that's something that I see day in, day out, working with schools, supporting them to adopt a more risk-friendly attitude, because it's, generally speaking, we're a risk-averse society here as well. But you can see the benefits of it, and once you start to see the benefits of it in children, then that tends to encourage people to be a bit more tolerant of that. And also, coming out of some research that I did with a couple of colleagues, those benefits can be accessed in education settings, in schools, mainly through the inclusion of loose parts, but also in conjunction with training for teachers, because if we put a load of loose parts and something goes wrong and the first reaction is to ban things, then that hasn't quite served its purpose. So training around how to manage those resources and how to cope with some low-level injuries, because they will happen anyway, whether or not we give them access to risk or not, and chances are that they'll get hurt more by not having access to risk. Counterintuitive but true. However, I think as a school you would also need to have that supportive school culture that adopts an evidence-based policy approach to risk taking. As individuals, you can certainly do a lot. but it's nice to have the support of others and the people above you. So that is something that can be worked through, particularly by adopting guidance from this document. So has anybody seen this? The risk benefit assessment for outdoor play toolkit. Anybody? Got some, I can see some of your heads shaking. Thank you, those of you who've got your cameras on. No, a couple more no's. Okay, so this was published in 2019, and it's very much inspired by the UK's approach to managing risk in play. We're just a few years ahead. That's all. About 5 to 7 years, not much. But things are starting to change, and obviously because of the fact that children are not getting that much risky play, and we're seeing the consequences of that. High levels of anxiety, high levels of low levels of conflict resolution skills, and a whole host of other issues, mental health issues, all of that associated with lack of outdoor play and particularly risky play, correlations there. So this is a toolkit that sets the scene for risky play, tells us a little bit about how it is perceived as risky, outdoor play in general, but actually when compared to sports, for example, rugby, football, the rates of injury are far lower. So it sets the scene in that way. We also looked at benefits of outdoor play and risk in play. And most importantly, it gives us the two main aspects to consider when we're promoting risky play, and in how to manage it safely. And those two aspects are risk benefit assessments and dynamic risk management. Has anybody here carried out a risk benefit assessment by any chance? Yeah.
Yes.
Got one hand up. Joanne, you have. Anybody else? And not just a risk assessment, but a risk benefit assessment. Yeah. We've got. Is anybody here not carried out a risk benefit assessment? You can pop things in the chat. It'd be really useful to know just how much detail I should go into it, because if people have. So we will have that split, I think, between people. Okay. So
Anna, can I just say something?
Yeah.
When I did it, it was because I had previously taken, and I've tried to look for it again. There was a risk assessment course that was offered through the National Geographic, I think that's what it was called, National Royal Geographic Society, and something else. And they actually, the benefit, they actually had it all detailed. So it was basically just a question, like answering all the questions and assessing. It made it so much more simple, but at the same time, it made me that much more confident. At the time, I was teaching grade 4, and we were leaving on a 2-day camping trip. And I needed to feel that what we were doing was safe for the whole crew, like the whole bunch of us, because I was, promising the parents, I will take good care of your children.
They'll be safe.
But we were going to be entering water. We were playing in streams. We were, it was just all kinds of, we were near ticks.
Great.
I was, so just the assessment that I had to go through. So yeah, I think it really helps, because I don't think to have that guideline was really super helpful. I still have the book that they gave me, and I could probably send Chris like a copy of like the assessment, just like sort of just what you have to go through. But it's also a wonderful course. It was given in 2017, and I haven't found it offered anywhere since then, because it would be great to take a refresher course.
Yeah, it's something that comes with practice as well. So, there's only so many things that they can tell you about how to carry out risk benefit assessment. It is highly dependent on your children, on your environment, on your resources, on the weather, on the time of the day. but yeah, it's nice to have that guidance in the beginning. But there's nothing that you can't do without reading this guidance document, and there are some examples in there as well. So they give examples of tree climbing. There are some kind of completed examples, and there is a kind of empty form that you can use as a template. But generally speaking, risk benefit assessments are documents, living, breathing, dynamically updated documents that don't just take the risks into account, also look at the benefits, the developmental benefits for children. Doing a risk assessment is not enough. Play isn't that straightforward. And if we're only looking at the risks, then the chances are we are not going to allow certain activities to happen. Whereas if we take a balanced approach and weigh up the risks against the benefits, then we might be way more inclined to allow certain things to happen. Now, somebody's linked the course there. Thank you, Danielle. So that is a tool that will definitely make you feel more confident. I'm happy, Joanne, you can kind of vouch for that. It allows providers to satisfy the legal obligation, so you are carrying out a risk assessment, but you are doing it as a practitioner, as a professional, making your own judgments about not only how you're going to keep children safe, but what you're providing is benefiting children in a developmental way. So the template in the form is quite comprehensive. For schools I work with, they have a much kind of simpler template, but the more detailed, the better, the better you'll feel. But we're looking at benefits, we're looking at the most serious risks usually, and then we're looking at how to mitigate against or reduce the most serious risks. So control measures. And that's what the risk benefit assessment is. Is that document that shouldn't just gather dust once it's done. It should be regularly updated, because if we're playing with tires, for example, we take them in, children find new novel ways in which they use them that you might not have anticipated. So at that point, we come back to the risk benefit assessment and we update it with those new novel ways of playing. So it is that constant process, but it does give you a lot, peace of mind. And it is something that is standard practice here in the UK anyway, and has come from years of kind of battling against the risk-averse society, essentially. So that's risk benefit assessment. You can have a look at the actual examples in the toolkit, but we'll have a go at actually doing one as well. So that's one side of managing risk safely and making sure that we're taking that balanced approach, which is really important. The other side of things is dynamic risk management. And this can be a journey, especially if you're somewhere on the kind of risk-averse side of the spectrum. But this is what will ultimately make you feel more confident in children's ability to manage their own risk and give them more freedom to do so. It's a bit like a vicious cycle. Children's capabilities are dictated by what we allow them to do. They won't demonstrate ability unless we allow them the freedom to engage in that type of play. And when they do, that gives us more confidence and we allow them to do things more. But if we don't see it and we don't do it. So dynamic risk management is about being in the moment, in play real time. And it's about all of that inner chatter, should I intervene, should I not, what's going to happen, preempting, assessing, making decisions, deciding how to intervene in children's play, whether to intervene or not. All of that is part of dynamic risk management. And again, just like the risk benefit assessment, it needs to be balanced and it needs to have a sense of, is this real perceived likely risk, or is it me panicking? Am I panicking? Am I thinking about all of the possible things that might happen and stopping it dead in its tracks? Or am I taking a balanced approach and thinking about, is that child looking around before jumping off? Are they taking the necessary steps to keep themselves safe? If yes, happy days. Let's try and see what happens. If not, there are ways to intervene that don't just stop risky play, that support it. And that's very much about communicating with children, and something that we should do, and that if we do, we'll see children developing those cognitive skills of not just assessing risk and coping with it, but also thinking about the consequences of their actions, which is quite a difficult skill to master, particularly at 4 and 5. So this is a bit of a guide on how to kind of, help you do dynamic risk benefit assessment. It's a very simple one, but it's quite an effective one that I've had staff print out, teachers print out and putting it on the playground usually. So it's a traffic light system. Most of the time we'll be operating in the open observation green area. We're trusting that play is not dangerous. We're usually non-intrusive, particularly in outdoor play watching. If something tells us that it might go wrong, or there's a potential for harm, then at that point we switch to amber and we just get a little bit closer. So proximity, and we check in with children. I see you're doing some amazing building here. Is it safe? Is it wobbly? Let's have a think about it before you jump off. So engaging children in dialogue, engaging them in reflection, thinking about, okay, what if I climb on this and jump off it? Is it going to stay? Is it going to topple? So those prompts need to be as open-ended as possible. Getting the children to think about what they're doing is what will then stimulate those conversations amongst children. And when you do that frequently, you will hear them starting to think about risk, starting to think about keeping themselves safe. And that's quite an achievement, particularly at 4 and 5. But actually, we know that children are competent at managing risk. They just need that encouragement and they need that support to develop the vocabulary and the ability to think about the consequences. So if things improve, then we go back. If you think actually they're not getting it and it does have the potential for serious harm, then at that point we can take action. We can take steps to reduce the risk. We can stop the activity, but ideally we do so in an empowering way. So always giving them a positive, wow, I love how focused you are on this process. You've built an amazing structure. It's not quite safe, so let's come back to it. Let's take it apart, rebuild it, make it a bit safer. How can we do that? And then at that point, you're guiding them in those safe ways. So that's part of effective dynamic risk-benefit assessment. There's also some questions to guide your thinking, particularly when you're kind of just starting out to practice it. And this is about thinking particularly around how you can stop yourself from going in and saying, no, that's dangerous, stop, which happens so much without, it's a reflex. It just happens. If we see something dangerous, then our first instinct is to stop it and just take it away, whatever it might be, whether it's a resource or an activity. So it's useful to think about, how can I take that breath? How can I incorporate a thoughtful pause before I intervene? Is the risk actually likely, or is it just coming from a fear, from your fears, which are, you're entitled to have? It's a very risk-averse society where we live in a litigation culture, and where there's a blame, there's a claim. So we can't get away from that. However, we're also practitioners, and we have a duty of care. And part of that care is obviously keeping children safe, but the other part is making sure that the developmental needs are being met, and this is one of them. So thinking about how you can help children better identify risk themselves. So how do we prompt them? How do we stop an activity, without necessarily shouting or coming back to it, encouraging them to come back to it. So some prompts for reflection, and there's more prompts for reflection separately on the handout as well. So thinking about outdoor play in larger terms. Another poster that might just, work for different people. Largely the same thing. Few more words. So if you're a read write kind of learner, there's another option there for you. So let's spend the last 10 minutes, and we'll probably go over just about 5 minutes. If you have to go, then that's fair enough. But you've also got the main kind of, the bulk of information for the session. So I would like for people to have a go at carrying out a very brief, it's a brief risk benefit assessment. We're not going into the level of detail that you might find in the toolkit. But I want you to have a think about something risky that you don't allow in your setting currently, or that you haven't had the confidence to allow in your setting, for whatever reason. And if you can't think about that, then you can choose from one of these examples. So play fighting, playing with tires, climbing a tree, throwing rocks, which is a very controversial subject. Mental schemas, so it is learning for children, but we don't really like it, and running around with a large stick. So you just pick one. Have a go at, so if we put the document in the chat, I think that might be the best way to do it. So I can drop that in. I'm trying to gauge whether there was enough time or not. So I'm really confident that you can identify the risks and the benefits. So can I ask, what sort of actions, what sort of ways of mitigating against the most serious risks, what did you go for? And which one did you choose? Did you choose something from your own setting, your own experience, or did you go for one of the examples? What did you focus on? Who wants to share?
Hi, Anna. I'll say it. We chose from the list in our group, and the two were play fighting and running with sticks. And
they did two extra work.
We had extra work, but it's different experiences. But I think it's one of the things that came up is we're guided sort of by school rules, And but what was interesting is that I can't remember her name, the woman who last spoke in our group, was saying how when she is outside, as long as she's present, she allows the action she gives power to the children in making those decisions. I thought that was interesting. Because it's true if you're there and you're observing them, but I don't know how. I guess it would have to be run in our school by the principal. Can I make this decision? Can I go, certainly with play fighting sticks. Mm-hmm.
So did you was the conclusion that the benefits outweigh the risks or not in theory?
To me, the benefits always outweigh in these, like the ones that are listed here. Absolutely. The benefits outweigh the risks. Because personally, I did all of this as most of us probably in this thing did all of these things. And that's why we know how wonderful all these things are. Play fighting is so much fun. And that's it for me, but I'm sure, I don't know what other people think.
So for play fighting, what kinds of prompts? So if we were allowed to do it, and when you frame it in terms of the benefits, usually people do change their minds, and especially if it's guided and encouraged and framed by way of, well, we're learning about consent and we're learning about social rules and where to touch and where not to touch. And also all mammals do it. So we are wired in that way. So it's obviously a need, it's not just a play type, it's a need. What kinds of prompts could we offer children? Because it is the kind of play that tends to escalate quite quickly because children don't have yet the capacity to communicate their needs and communicate when it stops being fun. What did the group agree on?
There was one woman who spoke about that in her group of K5s, they do this thing where they're all little doggies and they all like just jump. So it became like this imaginary thing. So in that way, it sort of permitted them, they were like puppies. But is she here? Can she talk? Because it was wonderful to hear from what she was saying. Because I thought it took that element of not escalating out of the equation.
Yes. So my students were playing puppies a lot in class, but that gets very loud. There's a lot of running around, crawling around, barking, stuff like that. So what I decided to do was encourage them to play that game outside. So, you know, in the winter, even they'll play on the snow hills. So they're crawling around their hands and knees, hopping over each other, rolling down the hill together. And that's fine. They're always happy when they're doing it. Nobody gets like too rough. If they do, I redirect them. But it's usually a fine play. Like they don't, it usually doesn't go badly. Like they're pretty happy to play that game. So, so it works out for both of us because I'd rather have it outside, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a really nice way of framing play fighting with puppies and its imagination. But play fighting comes in many, many forms. And I think one of the ways in which people are more comfortable with it is if we use the scrap on scrap rule. So if we give them pool noodles, for example, or sticks, we agree with the children that it's only the items that we'll touch. We won't actually touch each other with them. We won't hit each other with them. So that's a very easy way of framing that to children, and a nice way to kind of get, still meet that need, but it makes it less about the physical contact. Although children will always seek to be sensory, to kind of, feel and hit each other, and in a non sort of, hurtful way. And at that point, maybe we can have crash mats, designate a safe area for it, and have prompts for them. Are you still feeling safe? What's the safe word? How do we stop when we need to stop? But yeah, are you still having fun? Usually is a good question to ask. Are you still happy? Are you still playing? There are ways. So one of the resources that I've shared with you is this at the bottom. So risky play among 4 and 5-year-old children in preschool. So it's an academic study that splits risky play into 6 categories. It's an old study now. It's quite popular, very easy to read. But I've also linked an article that looks at how can we prompt children, safety prompts, so questions that don't stop their play, but encourage them to think about safety when taking those 6 different types of risks. And that is called Going Beyond Being Careful. So I'll just link that very quickly here. It is definitely there in your further reading document, but I just thought I'll just share it here very quickly. That's a really useful one. What to say, what else to say when you want to say be careful, because be careful rolls off the tongue, but it can mean lots of different things, and 4 and 5-year-olds don't quite know what we mean by be careful. Sometimes it's don't put your foot there, sometimes it's don't run so fast, sometimes it's so how can we actually give specific prompts to children? What can we ask them in order for them to be careful, but in a much more informed way? So that's there. Some conclusions very, very quickly, because I know we have run over. Thank you very much for staying. I think it's really, really important conversations that we need to have. Some conclusions from research and also from practice are that teachers' experiences and knowledge and attitudes towards outdoor play, and particularly risk, will directly determine their experiences, and also in turn that will dictate children's capability. and what we allow them to do and not allow them to do, which will have an impact on who they become and what types of abilities they develop. Generally, children are highly competent risk assessing, and especially when they are supported to do so. And that's where your risk benefit assessments and dynamic risk management come in. And I would share a video of sort of 10-second video with you. I might try. Let's see if it works. Just to illustrate what children can do when allowed to do so. So hopefully it might be a little bit jumpy actually. Can tell me if it is and if you can see it. We'll see that. So I don't have permission to share that. That's why it's not in the presentation. But that is amazing. That is some amazing physical skills, some amazing upper body strength that you don't typically associate, girls with. But that was down to them having that freedom, having the freedom to explore, having the freedom to engage, and being supported, thinking about safety, prompts, dynamic risk management. So really, really important stuff when it comes to outdoor play and supporting it. Couple of questions for reflection here. So, thinking about concerns around outdoor play and also how you could promote more risk taking in the play space. Some examples of the resources that I've put a lot of links in there, and they're all really useful. And also there's an outdoor play webinar in about 3 days, and that's free to attend. So I just thought I'd link it if you're interested in signing up. You've got Mariana Brusoni, who's one of your national play heroes, talking about her research, and a couple of other people looking at early childhood education and outdoor play. So I thought how relevant and what amazing timing. So thank you very much. Thank you, very, very much for your contributions. They've been absolutely fantastic. And obviously we couldn't do this without you. So thank you very much for engaging. If you could take a couple of minutes to do an evaluation form, that would be really useful for us. There's only 3 questions, so it's a very quick one. Chris, I think, is
here. I'll
on
put it
the
in
link.
And I'll file all of this stuff similar to the other sessions that we did, so that you have it all in one area, so you don't have to search around with all the links that we are shared and stuff. So I want to thank Ana together. Awesome. So many things to think about. And you always come to us with more things to think about, which is great. It keeps pushing us forward. So thank you for sharing, and thanks everyone that hopped on today. Thanks for coming and learning together. That was really cool.